Cameron will be staying at 10 Downing Street. The current British Prime Minister's Conservative Party secured a majority of 331 seats in what is now described as the most unpredictable UK election in a generation. Pre-election polls had indeed suggested that the UK was headed towards a very close vote and a hung parliament situation. But after counting the ballots, surprise! The party had a clear majority over others.
I will now form a majority Conservative government.
And perhaps the Conservatives have Kate and William to thank. According to some, the birth of the second royal baby just a few days prior to the election may have given them some advantage, since a feel-good boost so close to polling day is usually regarded as a plus for whoever is in power. Our focus this week is on the United Kingdom.
Hello and welcome to our focus on the United Kingdom, which re-elected David Cameron as Prime Minister with an unexpected majority, overturning poll predictions and sweeping the Conservatives to power as three of his election rivals resigned following their disastrous turnout at the polls. Now, our first guest for today is probably somewhat disappointed from these results. Keith Fraser, who ran as UKIP parliamentary candidate. Hi, Keith, joining us from London. Hello.
Hello, hi, how are you?
I'm great. So, a shocking victory for Cameron. How can you explain these results, especially when the pre-election polls predicted a very different outcome?
Well, I actually put it down to the fact that a lot of the voters for my party, UKIP, decided at the last minute to vote Conservative because they were absolutely terrified of the idea of Ed Miliband being at number 10. So I think there was a lot of tactical voting. That's my take on it. I'm not disappointed by the result, although I'm disappointed by the fact that my party was effectively got a third of the vote, or was third in the vote, percentage-wise, and has only got one seat.
And Keith, what were the major concerns for the British voters, and what was the voters' turnout?
Well, look, voter turnout is never 100%. I'm not quite sure the turnout. I think it was something like 67%, something like that. But I think the main concerns, and I think the Tories played on it, was the economy. In the last Labour government, they left the country in an absolute financial mess, literally penniless, and the Tories have sort of exercised a policy of restraint, cuts, austerity, which is an important thing for the country going forward, because we don't want to leave a lot of debts going forward for the next generation, which could happen under a Labour government. I think people were very worried about that.
So what is now expected from the new government and from David Cameron himself?
Well, my expectations are to continue cutting the deficit, hopefully the national debt, although the national debt has actually gone up in the last 5 years. That is very important because we want to get to a situation where we're out of debt. You know, on an individual basis, people don't understand, certainly the Labour voters think we can spend, spend, spend. But of course that money has to come from somewhere, and it's got to be paid off.
Keith Fraser from UKIP, thank you so much for this interview.
No problem at all. Nice to speak to you.
The issue of immigration has been a prominent topic in the election campaign in the UK. According to a latest poll, concerns over immigration placed second on a list of 13 policy areas occupying voters, sandwiched between the economy and health. Our next guest is Ian Preston, an economics professor at University College London. His research focuses on economics of migration and the nature of attitudes towards immigrants. Hello, Professor Preston. So why is migration such an increasing concern in the UK? And could it be explained from a financial point of view?
Well, I think it's an increasing concern because numbers have been higher over the past decade than they have been in previous decades, especially after the accession of East European countries in the mid part of the last decade. That was followed by large flows of immigrants into the country that I think set off concern among some people. And some of that, I think, is concern about economics. People are worried about effect on wages, effects on employment, effects on public finances. I don't think these fears are particularly well-founded, but you can understand where they're coming from, and politicians are reacting to that.
And from your research, what kind of policies that has to do with migration itself or migrants' populations work the best, and what mistakes have been done in the UK?
Well, Personally, I'm in favour of relatively liberal policies on immigration. I think the openness of the market within Europe requires that labour be able to flow within the European community to places where it's most needed. That's not the attitude of politicians. I think they worry about overall numbers. One mistake that's been made by the last government, I think, was that one of the two parties in the coalition, the Conservative Party, had a target for overall numbers, which they failed dramatically to meet.
And Professor, what kind of tendencies do you recognize among second and third generation migrants? Do they assimilate more into local society, or do they really turn more extreme about religion, as media sometimes indicates?
No, I think they tend to, if you look at their attitudes, the attitudes of immigrants tend to assimilate to the attitudes of the receiving population fairly soon, I think, within a few generations, or even in just the second generation, or even the first generation. So, yeah, I do think they do tend to assimilate.
Professor, thank you so much for this interview. And now, what else is going on in the UK?
May 8th marked the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe. Britain celebrated the first Victory in Europe Day on the 8th of May 1945 after Nazi Germany surrendered, thus ending the Second World War. The 1945 celebration saw more than 1 million people in the streets across Britain, with many outside Buckingham Palace to see King George VI and Prime Minister Winston Churchill wave to the crowds. A teenager has become the first in the UK to pass his driving test using a virtual instructor. 20 driving test centres in the UK were chosen to trial the revised practical exam using a navigation system. The Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency expects 1,000 drivers in training will take part in the revised tests, which will continue until the end of the year. Europe's growing obesity crisis will see almost 3/4 of men and 2/3 of women in the UK being overweight in 15 years. Projections by the World Health Organization and UK-based researchers say a problem of enormous proportions will face the country in the next decade. In an effort to cut down on drunk patrons, a McDonald's franchise in Cambridge will now make customers take a breathalyzer test. Anyone who blows twice the legal driving limit, about 0.08 in the UK, will be denied entry. Soft drink bottles and canned drinks will also be inspected for hidden alcohol. An Australian woman in a tiara sneaked a kiss on Prince Harry last week as he greeted crowds who gathered to greet him in Sydney. The woman was seen kissing Prince Harry on the cheek and then trying but failing to land another on his lips. Prince Harry spent the last month in Australia as part of an exchange program with the Australian Army.
Media headlines and media outlets in the UK have been fantastically busy lately reporting about the royal birth, right? First, it was the baby's gender that preoccupied the kingdom, then it was her name, and the biggest question now seems to be, how did Kate look so good when she emerged out of St. Mary's Hospital? Now let's dive into this British gossip craze with our next guest, Jonathan Sachadati, I24 News correspondent in London. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi.
So what do you think about the choice of the name, and what has been the reaction on the streets of London?
Well, the interesting thing about the name is, both for their first and second child, there were bookies taking bets on what the child would be called, and both times the bookies basically got it right, which goes to show how royal baby naming is actually not so much a free choice like most people have. I mean, there was no chance, for example, that we'd see a Beyonce in the royal family or a Kylie,
No.
But instead they stick for traditional names that have some sort of importance. And in this case, it's no different. We have Charlotte, which is connected to Charles, like Prince Charles, the baby's grandfather. We have Elizabeth, which of course is Queen Elizabeth II, who's the baby's great-grandmother, and we have Diana, who is the baby's grandmother. So you can see how these names inspired the naming of the second child to the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge.
And why do you think monarchy survived in Britain, whereas it has disappeared in other countries across Europe?
I suppose the easy way to answer that question is to say, why not? You know, the royal family is much loved in many ways. I mean, on the slightly more frivolous side, it provides sort of soap opera fascination to people. It's something that people like. It has a historical importance as well. And also because the monarchy in this family has been, over the course of history, modified into something which, whilst still being, you know, aristocratic in nature and non-meritocratic, you know, no child can grow up planning to be the Queen, though Kate Middleton did pretty well in marrying into the royal family, and she one day will be married potentially to the King, Prince William. But other than that, most people can't aspire to be the monarch the way you could aspire to be, say, the President of the USA or the President of the State of Israel. But on the other hand, the power has been modified by the democracy that we have in this country, and so there's no real threat from the monarchy, and it provides a great deal of stability, history, fascination, pomp and circumstance, and these are all things which are part of the fabric of being British.
Sir Jonathan, thank you so much for this interview. Keep celebrating.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
The entire world has been closely following the royal birth, but when it comes to pregnancies in the UK, the focus is elsewhere. The country has the highest rate of teen pregnancy in Western Europe. However, according to latest statistics, the number of teenage pregnancies in England and Wales has fallen to the lowest level since 1969, when records began. Now, we would like to discuss this issue with our next guest, Alison Huntley, Director of Teenage Pregnancy Knowledge Exchange at the University of Bedfordshire, and she's joining us now. Hi, Alison.
Hi, hello.
So,
pleased to be with you.
Alison, how do you explain the fact that the UK, which is one of the most modern countries in West Europe, has one of the highest rates of teenage pregnancy?
Right, well, as you say, our teenage pregnancy rate is declining very steeply now. But before we had the teenage pregnancy strategy for England, the Labour government took a very close look at the reasons behind our high rates. And there were three main factors. The first one was that we found that young people had very poor levels of knowledge about their own fertility, about contraception. Then we also found that they said that they had a lot of mixed messages about sex. They felt that they were often pressurised into having sex early, but that getting contraception was illegal. And the third reason, which affected some parts of the country more than others, was that for some young people living in areas of high unemployment, becoming a young parent was a sort of passport into adulthood because higher education and work was not available.
And can you share with us a bit statistics? Do most pregnant teenagers, for example, choose to abort or turn to parents? And what ages are we actually speaking about?
About just over half of the pregnancies to under 18s are chosen to end in abortion. Just under half continue to become young parents. And amongst the younger ones, the under 16s, it's a higher proportion that will end in abortion, which again underlines the fact that most of these young people are not choosing to become teenage parents. They're just not getting the advice early enough and the confidence to seek contraceptive advice before they actually have sex.
Alison Huntley, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you very much.
And now I want to hold your hand and take you down to Strawberry Fields. However, not by myself, but with Richard Porter, owner of the Beatles Coffee Shop, author of Guide to the Beatles London, and holder of the title Beatles Brain of Britain. Richard guides special Beatles tours, and he is now joining us from the iconic Abbey Road. Hello, Richard. How are you?
Hi, how are you? I'm fine. How are you?
I'm great. So tell us, how did you fall in love with the Beatles initially?
Just listening to the music when I was very young. I suppose I've always been aware of them, but really got into it when I was like 12 years old, when I started buying the albums and stuff, and collected them very quickly.
Now, tell us about the Beatles tours you guide. Where do you go?
Well, obviously, the thing everyone wants to see is Abbey Road, which is right behind me here. 90% of the people say it's their favourite place on the tour, and it's so iconic. I mean, people come here from all over the world, literally. And, yeah, it's
photos.
Could be a very interesting place at times.
Richard, tell us, what is the most common question you get asked about the Beatles by tourists?
Right at the moment, it's come up again. Is Paul McCartney really dead?
Aha, of course.
You probably heard the rumour about the crossing, the Beatles on the crossing, that's supposed to be Paul McCartney's funeral procession, and with George Harrison dressed as the gravedigger, Ringo Starr, the Undertaker, and John Lennon, the preacher, and that Paul is wearing an old suit and is barefoot. Supposedly how bodies are buried. It's a big rumour that came up in the 60s, but it's been revived in the last few weeks, strangely.
And Richard, before we say goodbye, can you maybe sing to us a line from your favorite Beatles song?
Sorry, I didn't catch that, sorry.
Can you maybe sing to us a line from your favorite Beatles song?
Sing. Oh dear, I'm not really a singer. Okay. There are places I remember all my life, though some have changed. I think that was all you're getting of me. That's what, this is why I'm a tour guide and not a singer.
No, you have a great voice. Richard, thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers, thanks.
And thank you all for watching. Congrats to the kingdom, and see you next week. You know, a new week means a new country.